All right. All right, and we are rolling on Zoom. Hello and welcome everyone to another installment of All-Star Stuff, right? The All-Star Sessions. By now you may know that last year we laid down some source content called the 90-Day Challenge, which is, we're doing the same thing this year. We're just calling it something different. We're building our group coaching ecosystem in the integrity game, and I am super excited to introduce today's All-Star. Now, by now, if you've been following these along at all, you know I don't like to read from a bio. We put some biographical information in the promo graphics that we've been putting out there. What I want to do is introduce Cierra from the heart. And by the way, it's very simple with me. If you like me, I like you. So Cierra found me. She heard me on a podcast talking about the integrity game, and she connected with a lot of the concepts or the terms or the ideas or the approaches. And when she reached out to me and we connected and we started talking, I realized, oh my goodness, like a sister, like I feel like a sibling to some degree, but where I'm going on feel and vibe and emotion and empathy, you, Cierra, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself more formally in a second. You've got all of the literature, all of the clinical, all of the references, all of the sources. So I have tons and tons and tons and tons of admiration. And while we're, I'd say, young in our relationship that we're building, feels like I've known you for thousands of years. That's my introduction to you, Cierra. Will you please go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the topic for today in the 10-point model, which is goals and our approaches to goal setting. We're going to feature your expertise, but go ahead and take a moment to introduce yourself professionally. So great to have you, Cierra Walling.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. Yes, my name is Cierra Walling. I am a board certified behavior analyst, or BCBA. I do practice in the state of Nevada as a licensed behavior analyst. I reached out to Jeff, like he said, on a podcast that I had watched with him and a former colleague of mine. Immediately thought, wow, this is really cool. I see a lot of things that align with things that I'm interested in. I'm really big on cultivating similar interests in my inner circle, in my virtual village. So I reached out. We spoke on LinkedIn. We started a book club. He showed me his book. I read it. Immediately started outlining notes of so many similarities between the work that he does.
What?
Excuse me.
Oh, that's an Amber Alert. Hey, this is real time. You're getting it. I'm getting it.
It's the test. It's happening, guys.
Oh, it's a national.
The aliens are coming.
Broadcast system. Okay, there we go.
I apologize.
Okay, now that's exciting.
Hey, everyone's getting really woken up after that. Where was I? We had the book club. I'm reading his book. I'm outlining so many similarities between what he's doing and what I do in behavior analysis. And we met in our book club, and we talked about how, wow, oh my goodness, a lot of things that you're doing are a lot of the same things that I'm doing. We're just calling them different things.
Yeah.
And I've been in the field of behavior analysis, of the world of applied behavior analysis, or ABA, for about, I want to say 8 years now, formally. I've worked with children and families collectively for about 15 years now. I started out coaching sports, moved into the behavioral health sector, worked under a licensed professional counselor, marriage and family therapist. She was also a forensic interviewer and registered play therapist, primarily worked with children and family in the family court system. And I accidentally fell into the field of behavior analysis. Don't regret it. Super happy that I did. And now I run a private practice where I provide both ABA, and then I also do parent coaching, social skills tutoring for kids, and then a couple of other things.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into it. I can't wait to ask you a bunch of questions and just let the ecosystem feel your genius and your brilliance and you know anyway, all the things that I've recognized and why I invited you to be an all-star. Let's say hello to Sue and Patty. Sue was our all-star last week when we were talking about potential. Patty's going to be an all-star a couple weeks from now when we talk about proactive learning. So I recognize you guys. If you want to say hello, introduce yourselves real quick. I'm going to do a little bit of a review of the integrity game to set us up to this week, and we'll get into the content today. Sue, Patty, do you guys have any opening comments or any hellos that you want to offer?
Just lovely to meet you, Cierra, and I'm from Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, wow. Hi, Sue.
Hi, it's very nice to meet you. I'm from Illinois.
Oh, Hi,
which is
hi, Patty. I've never been there, but I've always wanted to go.
equally exotic. I tell you, Melbourne and Illinois. Anyway,
Not quite.
it's wonderful for you guys to be here. Let me quickly do this. And Patty, I always love when you're here when I do this because it keeps me on my toes to do it quickly. You guys, we're playing the integrity game. That's what these all-star sessions are all about. And we're going to stream them into the arena, which is the new name for the group coaching ecosystem. Last year, we did the 90-day challenge, which is running guest subject matter expert interviews to take us through the 10-point model. But how do we get to the 10-point model? I believe soft skills make strong leaders. You can learn more about me if you type in Forbes and Klubeck. They did this cool interview where I got to explain my coaching methodology, which really evolved into what we're talking about today, the integrity game. But here's the three main pillars. For me, it's all about getting people enrolled or engaged, getting permission to lead. We need to take time to really get to know who we're leading and then what they want, of course. And sometimes they don't know what they want, but that's what getting people enrolled or engaged is all about, is taking the time to get to know who they are and what they want. Then it's just motivation plus accountability equals results. And the integrity game was born in the land of accountability. It's been fun to say recently that we're on a mission really to like make accountability non-threatening. But a lot of people have a misunderstanding or a limited understanding when I ask what is integrity. And I've asked a lot. How many of you believe you have integrity? Everybody raises their hand. And then I say, please repeat after me. I swear not to shoot the messenger in 30 minutes. So I want to make sure we understand what we're really talking about. And most people think that integrity is either being your word or doing the right thing, regardless of who's watching. And that's part of it. But as I elaborate in keynotes and other versions of introductions to all-star sessions or 90-day challenge last year, wherever I've been promoting the integrity game, that's good, but not enough. Because if I said I was going to drink 18 beers before today's session, then I did. I will have done what I said I was going to do, but I couldn't claim integrity, right? And then the other thing is right and wrong, good and bad, clean and dirty, civil, savage. It's a moving target. It changes from context to context and opinion leader to opinion leader and so forth. So those are good starts. Those are good parts of the conversation, but they're judgment based. What I try to focus on is integration, the coming together of two or more things. I also like to focus, and this is one of the reasons I'm excited about having you with us today, Cierra, is that the evidence of our integrity is always behavior. It's not what I meant to do, what I wanted to do, we judge ourselves by intent, but the rest of the world is just judging behavior. And so when we do what we say we're going to do, we're integrating behavior with our word. And when we do the right thing, regardless of who's watching, we're integrating behavior with values, morals, or ethics, our own. And the world gets confused when we project our morals and ethics onto other people, and then we have a judgment-based understanding of integrity. So I like to break it down to just the objective rather than the judgmental aspects of this metaphor of integrity, and buildings and bridges and tunnels will collapse under pressure tests without structural integrity. And I'm here to tell you that individuals, teams, and organizations will too. So how do human beings create structural integrity for themselves? And in my opinion, it's having answers to 10 sets of questions that we're diving into on a weekly basis every fall, starting with the 90-day challenge last year and all-star sessions this year moving forward. And so I use a tennis shoe metaphor to communicate this idea of laces giving the shoe structural integrity so it can do what it's made to do, so it can reach its potential and stay on our foot, right? And so that gives us this visual here where we've got a ring on the shoe for each of the 10 points on the model. So after I did the overview week, in week 2 of our All-Star series, we covered purpose. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of your life? Or we could put any noun to this test. What's the meaning of the marriage? What's the meaning of the business? What's the meaning of the meeting? What's the meaning of the session today? What's the meaning of the post? What's the meaning of the article, etc.? Meaning and purpose, meaning and purpose. And then we talked about in the 2 weeks ago, we talked about gifts. And so the conceptual from God-given to man-made to self-generated to the psycho-emo barriers to being able to give and being able to receive gifts, but then coming down into what are we communicating to the world in terms of competitive advantage and differentiation? Why does somebody want to interview Cierra instead of somebody else? Why does somebody want to hire me instead of somebody else? What are the competitive advantages, points of differentiation? How do we market ourselves? How do we represent ourselves? Other than a name, a social security number, and a DNA sample, how are we different? And how do we embrace those differences and invest in those differences and communicate that to the world? And then we get into what we talked about with Sue last week, which is potential. And it breaks down into vision, mission, and objectives within our model. We want to lead people to being able to look out as far into their future as they possibly can see and describe what they see. Then come, still a far ways away, but what's the mission? What destination, what achievement, what accomplishment is available that would prove you're on your way to that vision? And then what do you need to do? Where do you need to be 1 year from now in terms of objectives? Then it takes us down. Anything less than a year in our model, anything less than a year, 3 to 6 months, 3 to 12 months is the area for goals. So there we go. 10 minutes in. How did I do, Patty? Here we are. We're in goal setting week with none other than Cierra Walling. Cierra, are you ready to rock and roll and get into this?
I'm so ready to rock and roll.
All right. That's my introduction. That's my overview. So first question is like, what's the big deal, right? Like, why is it important to set goals? And I mean, I say this because when I was becoming a coach and learning what I needed to learn in order to, have some capability in this endeavor, this profession, I learned that despite the fact that all of the Ivy League studies demonstrate that all high achieving individuals share the habit of goal setting, 97% of the population fails to set goals. So we'll talk about what prevents in a minute, but let's talk first about what's the big deal? Why do all high achievers set goals? What's the importance of goal setting versus like a hope, a wish, or a dream, or any of the lies that people are telling to themselves? What's the importance of goal setting? Let's start there.
The first thing that comes to mind when what's the importance of goal setting is kind of what you were saying earlier with, what's the difference? There is a difference. There is a difference between having a desire, I want to start a business, for example, and having a goal. By December of 2023, I will have filed for my LLC. Those are two very, very different things. One has intentions, one has very actionable items laid out. One also has something that's measurable. I can check off that I've done that. I can measure my progress when it comes to goals. I can't necessarily do that with desires. I can count how many times I say that, sure, but is that going to lead me towards the actual goal of what I want? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Another thing that's important for goal setting is understanding the difference between a long-term goal and a short-term goal. Your mm-hmm. short-term goals are really going to help you set you up for success to meet those long-term goals. Goal setting is also really helpful, and it's present in the research when you're trying to do one of two things. When you're trying to decrease a behavior, goal setting is really helpful for that. And then when you're trying to increase a new behavior, learn a new skill, just learn a new skill, maybe enhance your performance on a certain skill, creating goals around that, creating long-term and short-term goals around that is going to help set you up for success for both of those things to happen, to decrease some of these unwanted behaviors and increase some of these new behaviors you want to learn.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is I'm already like, all this stuff's coming to my head in terms of like where we're going to bounce around. I want to get into behavioral change, decrease, increase. Those are two forms of behavioral change. Start mm-hmm. and stop are others. But before we get into DISS, and I've got an embarrassing story about that, by the way, let me come back to and stick with this big question, the importance, right? Like, what's the big deal? What else do people not know when it comes to the importance, right? This is one of the reasons that I think prevents people, and we're going to get into that as a separate major question in a minute. But when we're the first big, what's the big deal, right? What's the importance? What can you share with us from your experience helping people change behavior? And it sounds like goal setting is a path to behavioral change, the way that you're laying it out. What are you experiencing, or what could you describe for us in terms of like how unaware people are about how important goal setting is?
It's funny because I think people are aware, they just don't know how to do it. And they aren't, and I think the part that they're not aware is the risks and benefits to it. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be short-term risks and short-term benefits. But there's also going to be long-term risks and long-term benefits.
This is interesting because I want to hear more about this in particular, because a lot of times a motivator, speaker, coach, achievement, go. We always talk about benefits. I want to hear about these risks.
Oh, there's risks and benefits to everything.
Yeah.
Part of the risks. So when in the clinical world of ABA, you have to address these risks and benefits when you're working with a new client, because you want to outline basically these are the risks if we don't implement these goals, if we don't implement this treatment plan. And then these are the potential risks that may happen if we do implement the treatment plan and if we do follow through with the goals and things like that. And then we go through the benefits. So there's 4 different quadrants if you wanted to draw that out. There's going to be risks to not starting. There's going to be potential risks to starting, and then there's going to be benefits. Well, there's not really benefits to not starting, unfortunately. Sorry, that's not 4 points. There's just 3. And then there'll be benefits to starting. If there are benefits to not starting, I just equate that to luck, or maybe you found some other outside resource, outside provider, something else in the works.
If you consider comfort zone a benefit, then I'm with you. Right. Yeah. Some people
you can stay within your circle. You can stay within your shell. I mean, that's beneficial to you, and not growing and staying stagnant. That's, to each is their own. That's just not how I follow my life.
Correct. I mean, this is one of the reasons that we bond, right? Now, okay. So I like this. This is like a nugget. Either way, there's risk.
Either way, there's going to be risk.
That's what's key. Yeah. It's like, instead of linear, it's like, hey, there are risks to not setting goals. Or what I like that you're introducing, which is not so often not prevalent in my work, where there's risks either way. It's very easy to say
either way.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons why there's a risk for if you do start is you could potentially do it wrong. So there's a risk there. And there's also,
it means setting the goal or pursuing it.
Just like, so let's say you pursue and you have the goals and you set the goals and you start to pursue the goals. There is a risk that you could do it incorrectly, or there's a risk that it could go wrong and it could fail. And failure is scary.
Yeah. Well, if we misunderstand failure, we're getting into barriers to goal setting, right?
Yep.
We're getting into barriers. We're kind of inching that way. I'll lay out 5 that I'm aware of, and we're talked about a couple. And maybe we'll merge these 2 questions. But before I do, though, let's take one more stab at this. What's the big deal? What's the importance? What's the significance, right? Number 1, here's what comes to mind. Let's see how you feel about this. When we talk about visualization, right? When we get into the goal setting how-to, right? One of the things that we're going to talk about the SMART model, is specifics, right? And the more specific we get, the more we visualize, or more that we can get a clear, vivid mental picture. So some literature calls it the secret in law of attraction, and then some literature calls it reticular activation. And so let's lean towards the more academic side, and let's talk about, from what your understandings of the power of visualization, reticular activation, how does that influence behavioral change in the context of goal setting?
So we call it acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and that's the psychology part of ABA. Being able to lean into your values and being able to visualize how you want to live your life and how to eliminate potential barriers. I know we're inching towards the other question.
It's okay. They're kind of merging at this point. It's fine.
But being able to, and that's part of goal setting. What are you going to do if you run into a barrier? What are you going to do if you start to see signs of failure? What are you going to do if your own personal emotional reaction to the situation is, oh my gosh, this is really overwhelming and I can't do this? Do you have a plan in place to help you regulate that and regulate yourself out of that so that you continue on with your SMART goals? I know I'm getting off the rails here. Please repeat the question.
It's okay. Well, I was just talking about reticular activation, right? Like the literature. So like what reason, like, let me just go ahead and do this, right? Let's throw these 5 on the table. Okay. And Sue and Patty, if you guys want to chime in at any point, if I see your microphones open, I'll notice and I'll chime you in here. So let's go ahead and put both big questions on the table. First question is, what's the big deal? Why is it so important? Okay. And one of the things that prevents, in my opinion, is that people don't know the importance. So the question is, I want to elaborate on the importance part. So let's pin that on the board, but let me lay these other things out. Number 1, people don't understand the importance. Number 2, people don't know how, like you said. And so I think by the end of our session today, we're going to get into some how-to, but let's put that over there for now. Number 3, it came up, but let's put it on the board clearly. People are afraid of failure, right? The pain of failure, which to me is a misunderstanding of failure. We'll elaborate on that. But I also think another barrier is people are afraid of success. People are actually afraid of achieving, and the separation
benefits.
anxiety, and the right, like, oh my God, what's this new life, and how am I going to be responsible? And are people going to come after me if I make $1 million, wanting my $1 million? And am I going to have to, all my family is going to ask me for money now? And whatever the case may be, right?
And I call this vulnerability, guys. He calls it success, and I call it vulnerability, because you're sharing yourself.
Yeah, well,
what happens is,
it's risky either way. Back to vulnerability.
It's risky either way. So the risks and the benefits are both an experience of vulnerability. You're sharing yourself with the world. You're sharing your product, your business, your specialty, your service, your relationship with another individual, with a group of individuals, with the world, whatever, platform you're on. And it's vulnerable, and vulnerability is hard. It is difficult. It is new. Anything that is new to us is going to be an experience of vulnerability. And sometimes being vulnerable, we say like, oh, talking about hard things and talking about my feelings is really hard for me. Like, I don't do well with vulnerability. But the other side that people don't realize is that sharing the good, sharing your wins, sharing when you did meet that goal, or when you did successfully, accomplish this, revenue for the quarter or whatever that is still vulnerability. And that is also hard for people. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, if there's a lot to elaborate on there. This is super exciting with all the thoughts that are going around to put rings around the Saturn of all of the good content here. I'm curious if, before I leave it anyway and get into more about barriers, what from your perspective, or from your experience, from your education, from your knowledge, from the literature that you referenced when you're doing the work that you're doing, what's the significance, or what's the role or the functionality of this reticular activation, the ability to visualize, the ability to get a clear, vivid mental picture, from the importance of goal setting? It's important to visualize what we want so that we see more opportunity to go get it. Again, there's some collections of literature that talk about the secret or law of attraction. Well, to me, it's no secret. Isn't there psychological and behavioral literature around like when the first car I ever got was a Volkswagen Bug. So then I start to notice all the other Volkswagen Bugs on the road they were all there the day before, but I didn't see them. And as soon as I tell myself clearly what I want, won't I notice things that I wasn't noticing before? That's what I want you to talk about.
Okay, so I'm trying really hard not to like dive in too much into like the research and academic lingo.
Dive away. I'll get you back up to oxygen if we need to. And we call it scuba diving in here. We call that scuba diving.
I'm gonna talk about the Volkswagen example first. So our brains are hardwired to associate things that are similar to us. And so that's probably why that would happen is, oh, I got this car. Now I notice all of the other cars, because our brains are hardwired to find commonalities and associate ourselves with those commonalities. So we're going to be more aware to find things that we have and that we do and that look like us. Our brains are hardwired to do that. It's also why we also create stigmas, because we're categorizing, and it's just part of our brain development, and we are programmed to do that. And then on the other side of things, when it, what did you say after the Volkswagen?
Like I will start to notice things that I couldn't see before.
Yes. After that. I was going to talk about relational frame theory, and I stopped myself because I didn't want to use that word.
Take your time.
Oh, goodness. Well, I can't remember what he said, guys. I'm so sorry. But what I wanted to try and say in response to what he was saying was how our perception of everything in the world is based off of our experiences, the way that we hear language, the way that we read it, hear it, understand it is completely based off of our perception and our experience. So, for example, if you see someone in scrubs, what do you assume? You assume that they're a doctor or that they're a nurse and they're some sort of medical provider. We assign meanings to visual cues that we see in our environment. We assign meanings based off of language that we hear in our environment. So my point in saying all that is being aware of how that process happens, and being aware that our perceptions are based off of what happens in our environment, and our understandings happen off of what was in our environment, is really going to affect your ability to change those perceptions. So just being aware that process happens is the first step to understanding how to change your understanding, your perceptions. It's what leads us to becoming closed-minded to open-minded, as an example. It's what leads children to be able to try new foods and things like that, to put it in, if you're a parent or a family member or things like that. Going off the rails. Jeff, reel me back in.
Yeah, all right. I'll bring you back. First of all, let's see if Patty or Sue have anything to chime in here. They're smiling brightly, and together they've got tons and tons and tons of wisdom to share. But either a comment on what I'm asking about or a question to further what I'm asking about. I'm staying on the importance of goal setting, the significance of it. Like, for example, one is the power of visualization. That makes goal setting important. I'm talking about visualization, reticular activation, getting super clear about what we want so that our brain starts to recognize opportunities to get it that we wouldn't have seen earlier. That was what I was talking about. And I've got a follow-up question or a follow-up subset of that. But let's see. Sue, Patty, do you guys have anything at this point? I'll keep going if not. Sue? Oh, both. All right. Yeah.
Patty, go.
Well, I think that, we're so familiar with the integrity game, and Cierra's so familiar with behavioral therapy.
Right.
I think we're having a little trouble merging the two. So I think what Jeff is asking in a simple way is the brain process that creates focus.
Mm.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things that tie into that.
That's one reason.
We could spend a whole hour on just that one question.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. That's one reason that goal setting is so important that most people are unaware of. Is as soon as we set a goal, we've set a focus. Sue, what were you going to say? And then we'll get back to Cierra.
Yeah, I'm certainly enjoying understanding a bit more about your conversation about building that awareness of how we our perception and experiences influence our assignment of meaning, and building that awareness just initially to be able to create change. So yeah, I'm really enjoying getting into the nuts and bolts of...
I'll nerd out with you about it more. It's I particularly enjoy that part of behavior analysis and assigning meaning and understanding and language development and all that stuff.
Yeah, where we overlap, to bring Patty's comment into focus is behavioral change. For me, like when I'm helping people set goals, and when I changed the SMART model, I added an A and changed the R to make sure that whoever I'm working with needs a coach. Right. Like if you don't have to change behavior, you don't need a coach. Right. But behavioral change isn't the focus of my work. It's the achievement. Whereas behavioral change might be the epicenter of Cierra's work, which is why I'm here ready to learn from Cierra. So we're talking about the importance of goal setting. First of all, people aren't aware of the power of visualization, the power of the brain focusing mechanism, the familiarity, the meaning making, etc. But another thing that I would talk about in terms of why goals are important is for time management. When I'm talking about time management, I say the number one time management strategy, never mind stop calling it time management, but the number one time management strategy is to set goals. Because if you set goals for the very most important things that you want to achieve, by definition, everything else is less important. So it becomes easier to what you say yes to, what you say no to, what you attract, what you repel, etc. So I want to, just make sure we exhaust this first part of our conversation on the importance of goal setting. It's one of the reasons people don't set goals is they don't understand the importance. Two reasons that I think goals are super important is the reticular activation or the focus mechanism of the brain when we get super clear. But the other two is prioritization, right? Once I've set a goal, if it's not one of these three major goals, then it's less important. So now I know what to say yes to, what to say no to, what to integrate into my calendar, and what to let bounce off of me like a wind blowing off of a building. So let's talk more about anything that you wanted to elaborate on there. That once we caught our breath and got Sue and Patty to contribute to the conversation. Where are you at now, Cierra?
So the first thing I think of is what's called visualizing and verbalizing. So it's like our way of basically saying what we've been talking about is like when you visualize it, when you can physically see it in your mind's eye and you can visualize it in your brain, you are more likely able to verbalize it. And then that leads into, if you're able to verbalize it, then you're more able to actually do it. And the research shows that when we have more exposure to language, specifically language, and just to recap, language can be written, it can be vocal, or it can be visual. There are different forms of language. So when we have more exposure to, so imagine we visualized it, we've verbalized it, and now we're into this phase of trying to actionalize it. That's a word, right?
Actualize, yeah, sure, something like that.
Yeah. So in order for us to cross over from this verbalizing to actionalizing phase, the more exposure we have in the verbalizing phase, the more likely we're actually to do it. This is why, for example, in like special education classrooms, one of the things that I teach teachers and the school staff is, and you'll read, and every parenting book out there will say this as well, you want to talk about the do behaviors versus the don't behaviors.
Mhm.
And the reason why, in the research, the more you talk about these don't behaviors, the more likely they're actually to do them. The more you talk about do behaviors, the more likely they're actually going to do them. So the more you expose yourself to different forms of language, to all the different forms, written, visual, and vocal, the more likely you're able to do them. It's also why fun fact, it's also why security alarm systems will, like when you punch in the code and say alarm, like activated, or alarm secured, you heard it. So you're no longer worrying about it later in the day because you heard it and you're like, oh yeah, I set the alarm because I heard it. But later in the day, you think, oh, did I turn off the oven? Because there's no button on the oven saying oven is turned off. You didn't hear the language.
Yeah,
Fun
I love how many of us have ever mindlessly parallel parked our car somewhere, got out of the car, gotten, just the amount of distance from our car where it'd be a real pain in the ass to go back, when our mind says, did I lock the car? And we had no memory of actually locking the car, but of course we did because of muscle memory. And now, well, if my car gets stolen, oh well, or do I go back and check? I've done it both ways. I've moved on because I thought I was too far away from the car, and I've gone ahead and gone back and like hit the button, did I lock the car?
But if you say it to yourself, if you actually outwardly say it to yourself out loud,
yeah, and
you're more
now
likely to remember it.
now they have the chick, chick, at least you hear that sound, which isn't linguistic per se, but it's still language because it's non-linguistic, it's non-verbal.
You can do auditory. There are like some things called clicker training, so you can do like auditory training to help you assign, like and that could be for goal settings, and that can be for goals, and that can be for just remembering that I did the thing. You can do clicker training. That's a whole other thing though. I'm getting off the rails, really back in.
All right, no, we're on the rails, trust me. And what we're talking about is goal setting. And so it's 1 point on our 10-point model in the integrity game. And so it deserves the entire conversation. Now, it looks like, am I freezing? Are you guys freezing? Am I freezing? Who's freezing? You know what's happening. I'll tell you what's happening.
You did freeze, froze me back.
Stay with me. I'll tell you what's happening. I'll tell you exactly what's happening. This is super exciting. Sometimes you freeze and you don't know why. I'll tell you why I'm freezing. Because a whole bunch of I'm on campus at San Diego State University right now. And when one class lets out, on Mondays, Wednesdays, 10 minutes till, all the students walk by and all of their signals are on the same Wi-Fi, San Diego State University. So it gets a little crowded. So if there's hiccups, it'll go away in a minute or two when things settle back down. Now let's get back into this. We've really, really rolled up our sleeves and wrestled around with what's the importance of goal setting. We understand reticular activation, visualization. We understand the visualize, the verbalize towards the actualize. We understand that it helps us set priorities. We get really clear on what we say no to and what we say yes to when we've been clear about what we want. And let's go ahead and now move into barriers, right? I've listed them out, but let's elaborate on any of these. Yeah, barriers to goal setting. So I learned from one of my mentors, Brian Tracy, these first 4 that I laid out. People don't know the importance. They don't know. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of success, or they don't know how. So we're going to come back to the how to set goals to wrap up, because I think we both have some approaches to that, Cierra. We want to get into that. But a fifth reason that I added, let's see what this prompts. A fifth reason that I added, and by the way, for those of you that are out there marketing yourselves and you've learned some content, you just don't want to regurgitate other people's content. If you change it by 10, 20%, you can call it your own, as long as you credit where credit is due. So here I am giving Brian Tracy credit for these first 4, but if I add one, that's a 25% increase, so I can call this my own. 5 barriers to setting goals. Number 1, we don't know the importance. 2, we're afraid of failure. 3, we're afraid of success. 4, we don't know how to do it. And 5, human beings are unlikely to commit themselves to pain. So what I'm getting at is, if we set goals, and it's my belief that we have committed to some form of pain. And I think that human beings have an expedience factor, a natural pain aversion. I want to hear what you have to say about this, but to finish the offering, it's either the pain of regret, knowing what they want, knowing they didn't do anything about it, or the growing pain, which is getting out of our comfort zone and willing to the vulnerability, the risks. So it's either the pain of saying what I want, telling somebody else what I want, and then a month later saying, have you done anything about that? No. Pain of regret, pain of embarrassment, pain of underachievement, or it's the pain of actually stretching a muscle, getting a bruise, climbing a tree and getting a splinter. So let's talk about any of these barriers to goal setting, because it's not that everybody suffers from all 5. It's that 5 people may suffer from 1 or 2 or not all. So let's talk about that. The floor is yours, Cierra, when we talk about barriers to goal setting.
And there's so many different types of barriers, like Jeff said. He has the 5, and he's right on all of them. Sometimes they're internal, sometimes they're external, but most of the time barriers tend to be more personal. And it's really important that you really sit down with yourself, because they are really personal. Jeff just said it. Sometimes you might have all 5, and sometimes you might have just one of the 5. Your barriers are yours. They're going to be personal. So really sit down with yourself and really think about what those potentially could be. Is kind of like the first step. You can't really work on goals to compete with the barriers and what to do with the barriers unless you can define the barriers. You need to define what they are in your life, whether they're internal or external. And when it comes to avoidance to pain, I just want to comment, that's very normal.
Yeah.
Is like all of these barriers really are normal. These are all normal things. You don't need to feel bad about yourself, because you're not the only one. Everybody feels these things. We are programmed to feel these things. Our brains are genetically programmed to feel all of these things. And especially when it comes to avoidance to pain, part of that is because our brains are hardwired to protect ourselves. They're hardwired to keep us in survival mode. They're hardwired to protect ourselves in whatever capacity that we personally identify as a threat. What I might identify as a threat is going to be different than what even my sisters would identify as a threat, even though we come from, very similar DNA genetic makeup, even similar, upbringing with the nature versus nurture argument. Her barriers are going to be different than mine. They're very personal. It's very normal to have the pain response. If you want to get into more brain stuff, this is leaning away from behavior analysis, just so you guys know. This is more leaning into brain and trauma and trust-based relational intervention theories. If you guys don't know what TBRI is, look it up. It's amazing. But when you're having an avoidance of pain, that could potentially mean that you're having a flight, fight, or freeze response. And that's totally normal. But being able to identify your triggers, your barriers for when that's going to happen is really going to benefit you when you're preparing for these goals. Being able to identify your triggers, being able to identify what you're going to do when those triggers happen, being able to identify your barriers, how you're going to compete with that. That's all really, really important before we get into the actual goal setting piece. Because they will happen, and we want to be proactive, which Patty will be talking about next week. It's so funny because when I was talking to Jeff about which week I wanted to do, I saw you're doing the proactive week, and I was like, oh, I love proactive stuff. Like I want to do that, but you already had it. So I'm really excited.
I want you to know you're welcome to come on back, right?
I'll be with clients in the afternoon. That's the reason. That's another reason why we have this special start time today. Because I have clients all in the afternoon.
Just to create a visual, just to so people can stay. Next week, we're going to get into strategies, tactics, resources. Then among all those choices we have, we're going to get into word and commitment, taking action. So Patty's actually going to show up several weeks from now on proactive learning, and she'll have a all-star with her, Mindy Schrager, who is, I just got done doing Mindy's program, the shadow work from the Ford Institute that she's certified in. We're gonna have a huge conversation there. And just want to let you know, I mean, these start times at 4 p.m. Pacific, they're not set in stone. They're just a default. And then I'm always the more the merrier. So, we'll do what we can to make sure as many people can play along as possible. But just to finish out the model, then we'll get into the accumulation of accomplishments, and then ultimately, who are we serving and how do we benefit the less fortunate? But back to barriers to goal setting. Go ahead, Cierra.
So a lot of the times, and sometimes those internal barriers and sometimes those flight or fight freeze responses, again, they're going to be really personal. Doing your own interpersonal work is going to be really important for this. I talked about it before, but there's this amazing podcast episode called FFTs. For appropriate sake, we're going to call them TFTs, terrible first times. And it's the epitome of vulnerability. When you're doing something for the very first time, it's vulnerable, it's hard, it's new. And a lot of times people avoid that because it's hard and it can be triggering. And if you don't have a really good understanding of your triggers and your personal barriers to personal growth, it's even harder. I can talk more about any of the things I've talked about so far. I don't want to take too much more time on it.
You piqued my curiosity on this TBRI. Was it trust-based relational intervention?
Yes, TBRI, trust-based relational intervention.
Let's hear a little more about that.
Okay, sure. So recently, not recently in the research, but I've become more aware on some of the research that the institute that puts out this theorized intervention is that you can experience trauma in the womb. You can experience trauma prenatally, and most of us, I hope most of us here know that trauma affects our brain development, it affects our attachment style, it affects basically everything that happens in the rest of our lives. But something that I recently found out about is that particularly in prenatal or in early childhood, if you experience trauma, and remember, trauma is it's very similar to barriers. Trauma is personal. It is individual. What is something traumatic to me is going to be different, might not be traumatic to another person. So hard is hard. Trauma is trauma. There's no like, well, this was worse than my trauma is so much worse than yours.
Well, that's kind of trauma.
Yeah, we don't do that here. So
there's no kinda when it comes to trauma.
There's no like, this was worse than this person. No, trauma is personal. That's just how it works. And when prenatally or early childhood experiences trauma to them, it actually ends up creating your amygdala in your brain. So like I'm not going to go into a lesson about it if you want to.
You got a whiteboard right over there. Won't your camera
I know I do. I could run over. I don't want to waste too much time talking about it, but basically the amygdala is what helps activate your flight or freeze response. It's your decision making. It's kind of like your watchdog. It's like your binoculars. It's scanning the area. That's what your amygdala does. It's like identifying like, oh, that's dangerous. Quick, run. Or, ooh, that's a new thing, the opening of a business. Ooh, that's going to be hard and scary. We're just going to back away and hide. That's what your amygdala does. And when a child experiences trauma, and because their brain is still developing, and your brain continues to develop until you're like 25 on average for women and 28 for men, fun fact, your amygdala actually will grow in size. It will potentially be so much larger than the average individual who hasn't experienced what's perceived as trauma for them early on in childhood. And so they'll be a lot more watchdoggy. They'll be a lot more kind of reserved. They'll have a lot more walls up. They'll have a lot more barriers to face because they're very on edge. And oh my gosh, like, okay, and they're going to be like, that leads to anxiety. It potentially leads to all of these other mental health concerns and issues.
Yeah.
So that's TBRI. It's not behavior analysis, folks. That's behavioral health and psychology. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Look into it. They put out really good research.
But
Fun-
back,
fun stuff.
swimming back up to the surface, trauma is a barrier.
Trauma can be a barrier. Oh,
It's one of
yeah.
the barriers, right? And so on surface, it's fear of failure or fear of success, but underneath, it's a trauma
It
that
could be a trauma
creates
response
that.
related to childhood. It could be a trauma response related to when you were in the womb.
Mhm, mhm.
So unless you're doing your own personal work and you know, I think the hot new fun phrase right now is healing your inner child. If you're not doing that work, you have no idea if you have that potential barrier of trauma. You have no idea. You really have to do inner work, and you really have to look into it. And which is so exciting about the shadow work, because it sounds like they're doing that, and I'm really excited to like hear about how that goes, because I've never done shadow work before, but it sounds great.
Yeah, well, definitely, I was an active participant in the program, and I can tell you I got quite a lot out of it. And it's interesting what comes up when you meet, confront the shadow and both sides of it, right? Because, just briefly, I'll tell you, two sides of the same coin, right? Everything that we're afraid of and triggered by and traumatized by, and all of our, behaviors that we're ashamed of or unproud of, that's
There's
just
always
one,
going to be a why.
that's one side of the coin. The other side of that coin is everything that we're really proud of comes from like the same epicenter, right? So there's a lot there to make peace with, and there's a lot more that we can talk about there. Now, but the relationship is that on surface, I've been telling people for years, here are the reasons, like you said, there's 5 reasons that I came up with, right? Well, the 5th reason and the 5 reasons I talk about, but underneath it all, if we don't really get to the core trauma, a recognition of the trauma, we might not be able to overcome these barriers to setting goals.
If you can identify it, you cannot work on it.
And so then people just end up saying things like, I'm stuck, but they're not.
Or they're focusing, or they're doing it incorrectly, like I was saying before, and they think it's this, so they're working on that when they really should be working on this, but they didn't know that it's there because they couldn't identify it.
Yeah, and so a lot of this is better like goal setting. A lot of people try to set goals on their own. Like if I ask in a public speaking, how many of you set goals? I guarantee you 100% of the room will raise their hands. Say, all right, go ahead and write your goals down on paper and send them forward. Let's see them. Won't get as much activity, right? So that's the vulnerability piece. We are hardwired to protect ourselves. This is interesting. You talk about, the fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Is there more to say about what about like in other words, here's what I want to get at. In my experience, we fight, flight, or freeze in response to what is really a non-threat. Some like if there's a buzz by my ear, I'll just immediately swat and duck, even if it's a fly instead of a bee. So in your experience, are people fighting and freezing to what are non-threats in addition to legitimate threats, or is it all perception? Do you have any? In other words, people might think goal setting is a threat when it's not, or people might think setting goals is a
I think it's not, that has a lot to do with our personal understanding and perception of things. So like what I was talking about earlier, our environment will impact how we perceive things and how we understand them. So if I work at a zoo and I'm exposed to all these different types of insects and bugs, I'm a little desensitized to the sound. So I'm not going to perceive them as much as a threat.
Right.
But if I'm like a city girl and all of a sudden I go outside and I hear a bug, like I'm going to freak out about it because I have no prior experience with it at all, which kind of also leads into what you were saying, how I call it self-treating. So self-treating, self-coaching can work, but it's definitely easier and better if you have someone helping you. They're going to be able to objectively help. They're going to be able to measure progress. They're going to be able to do so many things, help you identify barriers. Even in my line of work as a behavior analyst, we have a very strict ethical code that we have to follow. And one of the ethical codes in this code, and I have to know what's in the code. One of them is I should not be self-treating. I cannot self-treat. And that also includes like family members and friends. I cannot self-treat myself. I cannot self-treat family members and friends. I would need to hire out. And there's a reason why they put that in there, because it's in the research. They researched it. So everything that's in the ethical code for behavior analysis for the board they researched it, and that's why it's in there. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about it.
Okay,
For
well, I want to come back to this fight or flight response, or fight, flight, or
Okay.
freeze, right?
Yes.
And I think that's I want to attach it to one of these barriers to setting goals before we move into the solutions and the how-to of it. One of the
Mhm.
reasons that people fail to set goals, we talked about, is fear of success, right?
Yes.
Well, before we get to the success part, the achievement, what's going to happen once I achieve things? I'm going to have to leave people behind, or are people going to come after me, or do I have new levels of responsibility that I'm not ready for, or imposter syndrome and all these other things, right? But let's get back to this ego defense. We're hardwired to protect ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So what I say is, another way to say people are afraid of success, the other way that I've said it at times, is people are afraid of peer pressure. Not the peer pressure like, hey, come have a cigarette because everybody else is smoking, don't you want one too? Not that kind of peer pressure. But what I'm talking about is ego defensive peer pressure. Like, in other words, I'm hardwired to protect myself. So if Sue comes along and says, hey, Jeff, guess what? I just worked with a third party, an external, I didn't self-treat, right? And I just worked with a coach to set a goal because I want to achieve something better in my life, career, business. So that information comes along, and all of a sudden it's a threat to my sense of self because I
Yes.
didn't set a goal. So now I'm hardwired to protect myself. And even if I love Sue, and I do, I'm going to say, oh, what makes you think you can do that? Oh, I could never do that. Oh, that's going to be
Are
hard.
you sure?
Are you sure?
Yeah.
And I'm going to, and without even knowing that I'm engaging in fight, flight, or freeze,
Mhm.
right? So now I'm sabotaging the pursuits of somebody that I love out of automatic, hardwired ego defense.
Yes.
And
And
that's
that's
the type of peer pressure that we don't want. Do we know in the back of our mind that if we go tell our loser friends that we're trying to be achievers, that they're gonna, kick us off the plantation, and or off the
Ooh, that's a
reservation? We're gonna
good
be
question.
we're going to be
So,
othered and blamed, and now, like, oh, look at, oh, you think you're better than us? Oh, Mr. Master's degree, whatever the case may be. I love Good Will Hunting when the best friend, the Ben Affleck character, says, dude, I come and I knock on your door every day, and every day I pray to God that you're not going to answer the door because you're better than this. You got to get the hell out of here. That was a real friend, right?
Mhm.
The one that wasn't so threatened, the guy that really wanted what was best for his guy. Like, go be a
Yeah.
genius. Don't be a loser like us. You're better than that. I love that movie for those reasons. So I'm offering a lot right there, but what do you have to say about that, Cierra?
So when in terms of in the back of our minds, like, are we able to identify if like someone's going to have that reaction or not?
Yeah,
Sometimes
are we aware?
yes.
Mhm.
Sometimes yes. We call it learned history reinforcement. So my learned history reinforcement with this individual is going to produce this type of result, this type of reaction. Most of us are pretty aware with our relationships on who's going to respond to what. That's because of a learned history reinforcement. If you're meeting someone for the very first time, you're not going to have learned history reinforcement with that person. So you might engage with them based on any similarities that person has with anybody else in your life with you. Because that learned history reinforcement with that person is similar enough to this person. So I'm going to engage with them based on my experience with that person. So that's that part. So yes and no. That's a yes and no answer. Also, so like earlier when I was talking about how our brains are hardwired to, with the Volkswagen example, our brains are hardwired to categorize and to kind of align ourselves with things and people that are similar to us. If well, I'm going to use that we're going to say Amanda, random person. This is me and this is Amanda. And I am starting to level up. I'm starting to do shadow work. I'm starting to do personal growth. I'm starting to improve my life a little bit. Amanda is going to perceive that as a threat for a couple of different reasons. And one of those reasons is she's going to go through a stage of grief of the old me. She is grieving the old me. She is grieving the person who her brain has assigned herself to be with because we are similar. I am no longer going to be similar to her anymore. And so she's going to really, really want me to stay and be similar with her. And because she doesn't want to, grief is painful and she wants to avoid that. So she's going to try and bring me back down to be at her level as much as possible for a number of different reasons. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep going. So she might resort to negative tactics to try and keep me down here. Discouraging statements like, "Oh, are you sure you really want to do that?"
Not intentionally, not even aware that they're
not
doing
even
it.
intentionally.
Yeah, that's the important thing. Yeah.
We are. So there's this thing that I like to call positive intent and negative intent, and we are hardwired to assign negative intent because we are hardwired to identify things that could potentially hurt us in our environments. Our brains are wonderful, and there's this thing called neuron plasticity. I can't say
neuroplasticity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we can retrain our brains to be more positive and to assign positive intent. So if I level up to here, I'm going to hopefully find other people. Maybe Amanda will come with me. Maybe I'll find new people once I leveled up that will also have positive intent. Wow, look at you. You're leveling up. That's so great. That sounds like it's going to be really hard, but you know what? I think your choices right now are going to benefit you in the long run, and you're going to be able to align yourself with more people that have positive intent versus negative intent. And you can train your brain to do that. You can train your brain to be more positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the offerings, before we even get into the how-to of goal setting, that we could say so far, in summary, number one, we're going to be vulnerable. We're going to be afraid as we go to pursue our goals once we set them. Number two, we have to have, in my opinion, and then this is why I thank you for the book that you chose for us in our little book club. And by the way, you guys are all welcome to join the book club. It's Brene Brown's book. I forget the title of it, but you're right.
The Gifts of Imperfection. It's short and sweet and simple. If you've seen any of her like TED Talks or Netflix specials, it's a really great introduction to the work that she does.
Yeah, the thing that I'm going to refer to in that book is compassion, right? How do we apply more? I'm encouraging goal setters to lengthen your fuse with compassion, for they know not what they do. There are people in your life that aren't setting goals, and when you come around as an achiever, when you come around as a goal setter, as I went through this when I was getting my master's degree, and how much I was like, I cannot believe that my mother, who's supposed to love me unconditionally, would actually have something negative to say about me getting a master's degree. Right. But I have to forgive her because she knows not what she does. She was just afraid of grieving the loss of her son, who's going to outgrow her, on and on. So we have to replace judgment and pain and upset, right, with that fight or flight response, that automatic thing, with compassion. Like, hey, of course you're going to grieve. Of course I'm evolving. And of course it's going to be hard for you. Yeah. And we want to be ready for those unintended barriers. We judge ourselves by intent. We judge others' actions. So we need to judge other people by their intent, which is just to grieve their loss of our old selves. We need to stay committed to our new selves. This is awesome. So let me take
when in doubt, give yourself grace or give yourself compassion and assign positive intent.
Assign positive intent.
You are going to be better off for it.
Yeah. Give people the benefit of the doubt. All right. All right. Very good. So we've talked a lot about, the importance of goal setting. We've talked a lot about what prevents people from setting goals. So now, right, and we've actually started to talk about some solutions. Before you set goals, understand what, the vulnerabilities, understand the commitment to pain, understand the fight or flight mechanisms in our peer group associations. But let's go ahead and like just dedicate our sprint to our finish line today. I can go for about another 15, 20 minutes. I got to get to my next class at 1:00. This is fun in the middle of the day in between classes on campus at San Diego State. I feel smarter doing these sessions from San Diego State than I do in my home office. Anyway, how do we do it?
That has to do with relational frame theory.
Okay, positive relational frame theory. Oh, beautiful. This is what's awesome. This is what, just forget my content and the topic of the day. I just got to tell you, I love you so much, because I'm just kind of just downloading whatever comes to me from wherever, right? Going with my gut and my word. And then you've got the absolute literary, academic, clinical reference for it.
Make me sound so much more smarter than I actually am. I've never personally done research myself. I'm very familiar with the research literature. I'd love to do research one day. If anyone's out there, hi.
Well, I have tons of admiration for your command of the literature because I'm a feel guy, right?
Yeah.
And like some people, Jeff, how do you know that? And I'm like, I don't know. So anyway, back to it. How do we do it? I know how I set goals, and I know how in the integrity game, when I learned SMART goal setting, I was like, this is cool because I've never heard of anything before. But at some point along the way, I kind of got to this point where I'm like, wait a second, SMART's kind of stupid and we need to make SMART smarter. And before I get into like my methodology on how to set goals, I want to hear from you. You're the all-star today. I want to learn from you. I don't do these sessions because I'm the know-it-all. I do these sessions because I carry them up with a framework, and I want to find people smarter than me and learn with and from all-stars, these subject matter experts that we're compiling. So it's your turn, Cierra, to teach me. How do you work with your clients? Is there methodology? Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet when we get into how to?
So if I'm in a clinical sense, if I'm working with a client, I'm working with the client. I'm identifying goals. I'm creating the treatment plan. I'm writing out these goals. And I'm writing them out specifically for them to be successful. I write them out for, 6 months, and I want them to meet those goals by the end of 6 months. So I'm going to write them out based on their current skill level. I'm not going to write them something that's super far and beyond that they're not going to be able to reach for another 3 years. I'm going to make sure that those goals are achievable within the 6 months for a number of different reasons. One, it helps with behavioral momentum. Start small, get bigger and bigger and bigger and harder and harder. It also helps with most of the individuals I work with are children. And so it helps with parents when they see their children actually having progress. Parents can get really discouraged and they think there's something wrong with their child if they don't see progress. So, you start small. You start with short-term goals. You start small. Maybe some of the goals that I put in there are going to be things that they already know how to do, but I'm just adding to their exemplar list. Okay, cool. So you have this skill. Can we do it in this type of setting? Can we do it with this type of person? How can we expand that skill and generalize the skill across different areas? Because they already know how to do it. Great. Let's use that behavioral momentum. Let's do something that they know how to do, introduce something new, and get harder and harder. So that's part of it. Primarily when I'm doing goal setting, it's going to be 2 different areas. One area is going to be, decreasing some unwanted behaviors, and then increasing skill acquisition, increasing new skills, increasing skill generalization, maybe increasing skill performance, like they do it sometimes, but not all the time, things like that. When it comes to decreasing unwanted, inappropriate, in the research, it's called maladaptive behaviors. Please take that with a grain of salt. So when it comes to decreasing behaviors, there's 3 points to that. One point is you're going to identify proactive, Patty. You're going to identify proactive strategies on how to decrease behavior. In my line of work, we have this joke where we say, the best way to decrease a behavior is to actually keep it from happening at all. So if I can be proactive and keep it from happening at all, great. I've already I could potentially be done right then and there. So outlining really specific proactive strategies, being really consistent with those proactive strategies. And that's why it's really helpful that clients have someone like me, because I can enforce that. I can help provide those proactive strategies. The second thing is you're going to have a replacement behavior, because that current behavior that the client is engaging in is meeting some sort of need. And in the research, we call it functions of behavior. I like to call them needs. They're
just to keep it simple.
we all have needs. We all have needs that we want to get met.
All behavior, 100% of behavior is an attempt to meet one or more needs.
Yes. In the research, there's 4. Arguably, in newer research, there's 5. I'm not gonna. If we have time, I'll go into them. I don't know if we will, because that is a whole other topic. But you're trying to meet a need. So if that you have to identify the need that inappropriate behavior is trying to meet, and then prepare yourself to replace that behavior with a more appropriate version. So for example, if I'm trying to get sober, let's say I no longer want to drink I no longer want to drink or smoke, and I'm trying to get sober, that need of drinking, I need to figure out what that need is being met. Am I hungry? Am I using it as for social purposes because I only drink when I'm going out and that's my chance to be social? Am I just do I just really like the taste of it? Is there some sort of like sensory relief that I'm experiencing when I engage in those things? Okay, I need to figure out what the need is, and then I need to create a replacement behavior based on that need. So if my need was for social interaction, okay, then I need to start, I'm going to join a dance class on during the week, and I'm going to help try and fill that social need in a more appropriate way. You have to do the replacement behavior. If you do not do the replacement behavior, we will teach ourselves a new replacement behavior, and it's more than often than not going to be another inappropriate behavior. It's more often than not going to be another unwanted behavior, which is another reason why we don't self-treat, because our bodies are they're going to find the quickest and easiest like solution to the problem, the need, I mean. So it's really like you cannot skip that. You can't skip any of these. You can't skip the proactive part. You cannot skip the replacement part. You just cannot. And then the final step is the reactive part. So if your client or if yourself do engage in that unwanted or inappropriate behavior, what are you going to do about it? What's going to happen? And you really need to work on making sure that the reaction corresponds with the need. So if, for example, to make it in very simpler terms, if I am teaching a child to gain attention of their parent by decreasing screaming and like tugging on their sleeve when they come home from work, I identify that the need, that they want social connection. They want connection and attention from their parent. That's the need. Okay, so if they do that, okay, I know that they're wanting attention from their parent. I know that they're wanting social connection from their parent. I may need to reactively interrupt the behavior and prompt them through different support levels on how to meet that need, depending on their current skill level and things like that. I might just show them like a little visual card and just like, oh, like we're going to use our words and ask, or maybe I point to my mouth and like I'll give them a partial verbal support and I'll say, I want, and I'll start it out for them and then they'll finish it. Oh, I really want to play with you. Like, I really want to tell you about my day. And that's how we respond reactively. Again, proactively, you're going to want to try and meet the needs. Okay, so they struggle with getting attention with their parents when they come home from school. Okay, cool. Let's work on that. Let's role play that. Let's practice. I love role play. In the research, it's one of the best forms of teachers. And I think partly because it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Doing role play and acting out a scene together is uncomfortable. And because it's uncomfortable, you're practicing vulnerability, which is a skill and not a weakness. So there's that part. So we talked about the 3 things with behavior and like decreasing behavior. And you have your proactive stuff, you have your replacement behavior to fill that need, and then you have your reactive strategies. These can be as long as they need to be. And then on the skill side, a lot of times I see when there are unwanted or inappropriate behaviors, it usually means that there's a skill deficit. It usually means that there's a lot of skills that need to be taught and to be introduced and learned and practiced and measured and all of those things. And that usually ends up competing with the inappropriate behaviors. You're just naturally going to see this like wonderful shift of like all these inappropriate, unwanted behaviors go down and these wonderful skills go up. And so, you're going to, like I said, you're going to identify skills based on their current skill level. You're going to identify skills maybe with the intent for them to be successful by the end of the 6-month term. You do not want to assign goals that are unachievable by 6 months by their current skill level. You want them to have progress. You want them to have behavior momentum and to gradually be successful. And that might mean that you need to include different support levels. That might mean, especially outside support levels. Like I said, I'm not self-treating. I'm helping another client achieve this. I might be helping a parent achieve this. So I will be assigning different support levels for that. I'm also, one of the biggest parts of behavior analysis, and this is a big difference between what I do and like what behavioral health and psychology does. Everything I do is based off of the data. So I collect data. I collect data on undesirable behaviors, and I collect data on the skill acquisition behaviors, or the skills that I want to see, and I measure that progress. I make changes to the support levels if needed based on what the data says. I'm able to point out, hey, your baseline was here, but now it's up here because of the work that we've done. I can prove that in the graph. I can prove that graphically and data wise. When you are collecting data, though, you have to, like I said, really early on, you have to define it. You have to really clearly define the goal. You have to really clearly define the behaviors that are being measured so that you can collect data on them. Because unfortunately, if you don't identify it and define it properly, you could collect data incorrectly. And then your graphs could, most often than not, when data is collected incorrectly, graphs are like all over the place. And you're just like, what am I supposed to do? How do I change the support level? What do I need to change? I don't know, because it looks like this. So you have to fix the data collection part.
Yeah, if I can jump in with a question here.
Yes.
And, I'm hearing a couple of different things. I want to make sure I'm cool. One thing I'm hearing is like a chicken or the egg. And I say that, how should I say, autobiographically, like for me, the goal is the achievement, like the top of a mountain after a bunch of work. Right. So there's steps up the mountain, but the goal is the top. Right. So when I'm helping people set goals, like what's the greatest thing you could achieve in the next 3 to 6 months? Then it's like, well, what behavior do you need to change in order to achieve that? And this is why I have so much admiration for you, because you go like, it seems chicken or the egg. Is it fair to say that for you, the behavioral change is the goal, is being able to determine that a behavior is changed rather than behavior? You know what I'm saying? Chicken or the egg is
because the goals are gonna be behaviors. You're gonna like I have skills, behaviors, they're the same thing.
Yeah,
it's
so
things
this
that
goes
you
back
can
to
see. They're observable and measurable.
Yeah, this goes back to, I think, the beautiful thing that Patty pointed out earlier is the different perspectives where we're coming from, right? If I'm a coach, a results coach, I'm focusing on the result, the tangible material result.
The permanent product is what we call it.
Okay, you got it, right? So how much money do you want to earn, or how many books do you want to write, or how many leads do you want to establish, or how much quality time do you want to spend with you, whatever it is, right? And what behavior needs to change on the way there. Other times when I'm working with people, it's funny when people say, well, my goal today is, and I'm like, if it's just something that you do once today, it's not a goal, it's an action, or it's a commitment, or what have you, right? So I'm seeing there's room for a shift. I'm just going to do a quick screen share on this visual because, right, like, if something I do once, it's just an action. Something I do repeatedly, like I drink a gallon of water every day, 5 days a week, right? I'm committed. Or I walk on an empty stomach 4 days a week out of every 7 days. And so there's milestones, there's progress towards my goal, but ultimately the goal is the top right up here. But right, there's some material achievement. But what I'm hearing from you is that the goal is being able to say, yes, this behavior has in fact decreased, or in fact increased, or in fact started, or in fact been eliminated. And then there's all kinds of milestones and actions and commitments and the things that you're talking about, where we understand what needs are being met, and replacement behavior, and understanding consequences if do and don't, and on and on. So I think it's fascinating because you're focused on, really, that's the epicenter of your focus is behavioral change, where it's just one screening criteria for me to get people aware that, hey, if you want a different result, you're going to need to change your behavior, and then you're going to need some support, some accountability, and some of these other terms that you were talking about. This is why I knew I was going to learn so much from you. And I don't know if there's a question there, but when I talk about how to set goals, very simply, I ask people, what are the 3 most important things that need to be different? And then what's the greatest thing they could achieve that would represent those things being different? And when they're asking those questions, they screen through the SMART criteria. What do you want to achieve? Is that specific? Is that measurable? Do you believe you can? Do you need to change behavior in order to get it? And then R is reason or reward. Do you want it bad
Your
enough?
why.
The why, to confront the triggers, to be ready for the setbacks, to brave the vulnerabilities, to be confronted, to be held accountable. So to just be super brief about this, I just want to do another quick screen share to the workbook in my coaching and leadership training, if I can find it without too much rigmarole. Basically, when I'm training coaches and we're taking people through this, we ask what needs to be different, and people don't get that question very often. So we say what needs to change or improve, or what needs to be created, what needs to be removed. What are the 3 most important things? Back to time management. If we know the 3 most important things, everything else is less important, right? So now we can manage time if we set goals. But then not only what needs to be different, but what's the pleasure and pain of that? Right? What does it cost you in the past not to have it? What does it cost you now? What will it cost you in the future? What is it meant to have that in the past? What would it mean to have that now? What would it mean if you had that in the future? So we want to get people associated to the consequences, the risks and rewards of taking or not taking action. We want to focus on needs. And by the way, I do have a minute or two if you want to open up your can of worms, but there's 4 basic survival needs here, and then 2 that I think are for surplus. So I help people rate what needs are being met by current behaviors and where are they at emotionally, the parenthetical
we talked about this, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Oh yeah, they're all based on
nothing
new under the sun. There's just different terminology and different frames. But ultimately, this is the R now, reason or reward in SMART goal setting. So what it comes down to is, right, imagine a coffee filter, and we run, this is screening criteria. This is the what needs to be screened by SMAAR, and the T is just the by when. So I'm staying practical. What do you have, a health goal or a relationship goal or a finance goal? So I'm focused on these material, tangible accomplishments at the end of pursuit. But what I think you're focused on, which I think is probably healthier and better in the long run, etc., the behavioral change is the goal. Because guess what? Anybody, what I'm hearing, and I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but all of this is available to us if we get focused on changing the toxic or the limiting behaviors, if we can, right? And so I just wanted to give a little bit of how I do the how-to in my ecosystem. But what I really am shining a light on right now, and I want to give the floor back to you, is if we put the behavioral change in the pole position of the top of the mountain is changing the behavior, now we can believe that we can achieve anything that we want. Anything that's avoided us is achievable if we focus on behavioral change. So it's not so much a chicken or the egg. When you're like Shaquille O'Neal used to say to me, Jeff, when we're in Miami, I'll pay for dinner. When we're in San Diego, you'll pay for dinner. Hey, when you're on the line, Cierra, behavioral change is the goal. When you're not here, it's some material, tangible.
I mean, you could, and like in some ways I do measure based on permanent product, but most of the time I'm measuring on their actual behavior. So if you wanted to put it, like dialing back a little bit, we have visualizing, we have verbalizing, we have actionalize, that's the behavior part. And then after that could be your permanent product part. So that's a fun way to tie it all in together. But yeah, I focus primarily on the behavior, and one of the beautiful things about focusing on the behavior is that if you are able to get them at a certain fluency level, a certain mastery level for that behavior, you're going to be able to use it for a bunch of different things. It's going to be able to be generalizable, and it's going to last.
Yeah, that's what I was
behaviors
picking
will
up on.
outlast
If we shift the
money.
if we
behaviors will outlast any permanent product that you could potentially make. You're like, if you get them to a certain skill level, it's going to outlast permanent products.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. So having said that, and I'll state the obvious, there's so much more that we could talk about, right?
There's so much more that we could talk about.
And I know we're close to time, and maybe we'll do other sessions and stream it. But here, it's time for me to do last call if I have any chance at not being late to my own classroom in 26 minutes. Last call. Sue had asked the question earlier. I'm afraid of opening up new cans of worms here, but do you think people are afraid of the process? And I don't want to answer that for you, Cierra, but they're either unaware of the process or certainly aware of vulnerabilities that are going to emerge as they, traverse the process. But
I think a majority of people have little tiny bits and pieces of the whole process as a whole. They have like little tiny pockets of, like, imagine a puzzle. They only have like a couple pieces to the puzzle right now. But it's the pieces that are missing, and they have no idea where they are. They have no idea where to get them. They have no idea what store they need to find that piece to fill in their puzzle. And I think that's what ends up becoming so daunting, is like, because there's so many different steps. Like, where can I find this piece? I don't even know what piece I'm looking for. Like, imagine you don't even know that you don't have the picture of the box of the puzzle. You don't know what the piece looks like. You don't know where you're supposed to find it. You have no idea how big it is. You don't know if you're gonna need more than one. Maybe it's two. Maybe there's the piece that's missing is actually two parts, not just one part. And I think that's what's daunting. And I think what happens is people they shift back and forth between, well, I know these pieces, and they lean into that stuff. But then once they get to the pieces that they're missing, they're like, oh, right. I'll get back to that. And then they go back to the things that they do know.
So I think maybe it's not the process that people are afraid of, it's the unknowns within the process.
Yes.
Right.
That's one way to say it. Yes.
Yeah. So this is, I'm a little sad that we're going to end the conversation, because I think I can go in for another hour and a half and it'll feel like 5 minutes.
Easy.
All right. And this is just, welcome, Sue and Patty. Welcome to my experience with Cierra. Right. But let me go ahead and invite you to open up your microphones, and let me do last call for comments, questions. Of course, my last question for everybody is, was this valuable? And if so, what was most valuable for you guys about today's All-Star session, as we really populate the arena with tons of great content with subject matter experts that actually know more about the pieces on my model than I do. And Cierra, you're certainly one of them. Last call, comments, questions, jokes, riddles, haikus, or expressions of value that you received from the session. Sue, you're up first.
Yeah. Oh, Cierra, thank you. Again, same as what Jeff's saying, I think I could listen to you conversing for another hour easy.
Just record my conversations to myself in the car then.
Couple of things that stood out for me that were really helpful at a personal level were when I'm leveling up and growing, friends may go through grief with losing the old me. Mm-hmm. That's really helpful, because I have sensed that, and I've had a level of frustration. And
you will also go through your own grief.
That's right.
The old you is dying, and so you'll also go through a phase of grief. And not just
losing yourself because the old you is dying, but you're also watching this other person go through grief, so you're losing them too. Mm-hmm. They're not just losing you, we're losing them. Right. Anyway,
change is hard, guys.
What else, Sue?
Yeah. And the other one was unwanted behaviors are often indicative of a skill deficit. And found that interesting for me to think more about as I work with executives and people that I work with. There's one person I had in mind. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. When you shift your brain like that, and you're like, wait a second, they're not bad. It's just skill deficit. They just don't know.
We don't need to get them to stop yelling. We just need to get them to start listening. Right. It's like, let's build the listening skill, and I bet the yelling will decrease. Right. I don't want to put, scenarios in your mouth, but that's awesome. Thank you. Anything else, Sue? All right. You got Patty. What do you got? Last call for comments.
I just want to say thank you.
That's it. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Cierra. This has been wonderful. And I have a couple of places that, I know I would continue talking with you about, especially I teach karate to kids, and the do's and don'ts, that whole aspect. I mean, anecdotally, a lot of what you mentioned, I could agree with, but it's really great to get more understanding of actually the brain and how it's working. And that whole thing about the amygdala and the trauma, that
It's really cool stuff. Like once you learn more about it, yeah.
yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, in last question here is that was the content, Cierra. Awesome. Let me just be a little bit selfish in case any testimonial videos can be cut from this. Does anybody have any feedback on how these all-star sessions are going, on the quality of guests I'm bringing in, or my interview skills, or how I'm facilitating the conversation? Is there any expressions, and you're invited to comment on this as well, Cierra, anything about these all-star sessions and the integrity game model and what it's bringing out for all of us to dig into and further our careers, both personally and professionally?
I'm gonna go first. I personally really enjoy having the space to nerd out in this way. Like I said earlier, and throughout the All-Star session, is we assign ourselves with people who are similar to us, and so having this space, having these All-Star sessions, allow us to find our people, our virtual village, and to closely align ourselves with people who are similar to us and want to achieve the same things. And it just feels good. It's
Awesome.
it's very rewarding. It feels every behavior has a need, and it fills my need for connection and social interaction, and intellectual conversations and things like that. So I personally enjoy all of my conversations I have with Jeff, regardless if it's an all-star session or not. So I thank you for the space, and I thank you for the conversations.
Well, I mean, we're all better for you being here, Cierra. So the gratitude goes right back to you for similar reasons and then some. Anybody else? Last call for comments, questions before we wrap up today's all-star session and I get into my next class that I'll be teaching here at the greatest place on earth, San Diego State University.
I just want to endorse what Cierra said. It is having that space to converse and explore and throw around ideas is fabulous.
That's why one of the reasons I budget 90 instead of 60, because I want to create the space. We don't always have to go 90, but I'm smart enough to know that 60 probably isn't enough for the types of genius and brilliance that we're going to try to bring out into these sessions. So Sue and Patty, thank you. It's not your featured week, but you're here anyway as consistent fans of what we're doing. Patty, your microphone's open up. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that these all-star sessions, they just go deeper into the points on the model, and that makes the model it not make it better, but it makes it more comprehensive.
Yes. And I like to joke around and say we go cluba diving on each of the points on the model.
I didn't go there.
Well, what? Of course not, because you're not as cheesy as I am, but I always love your smile when I go cheesy. But it goes back to structural integrity. You follow? Like the model is more sturdy with experts like Cierra coming in and giving it more support, more foundation, more depth, more reinforcement, etc. So my gratitude is immense for Sue and Patty, yourselves, Cierra. It goes without saying, our all-star for this week. And for anybody that's taken the time to watch a recording of this or the live stream that we put into the arena, or if you're going to watch a replay, we're going to do a replay, and I'm going to let the 3 different social media channels know what they're missing out on. And if for all the things that anybody could be doing, if you stop and pay attention to this session, any portion, even 5 minutes of it, I say thank you, because of all the other things you could be doing, you think that there's value here, and we're trying to live up to that and prove you right. So thank you for taking the time and believing in what we're doing with the integrity game and the ecosystem that we're trying to build. And I feel like we're just getting started. It's going to be so much better next year, the year after, the year after. So thank you, Cierra, for being part of our foundations and the lovely time that we spent together today.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. We'll see everybody next week when we talk about strategies, tactics, and resources. It's kind of like the bottomless pit, point on the model, right? Because there's strategies for everything. So it's going to be really fun to see what strategies we get into. We're going to have our guest, Laura Leach, who's going to talk about career management and executive recruiting and interviewing and landing the job and managing your career. Those are the strategies that we'll focus on in a larger context about concepts of strategy, what it means to have strategies, break them down into tactics, collect your resources, and get into action. But for now, I'm happy to wrap up. Cierra, thank you so much. I'm running through the virtual to get that virtual hug and all of the good stuff. I'm just just blessed with a lot of gratitude. So thank you all, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye,
All right.
everybody.